Right now in America, more young men are living in their childhood bedroom than at any point since 1940. Not during a recession spike, not during COVID, right now. 1 in 5 men in their late 20s and early 30s sleeping under the same roof they grew up in. And look, rent is brutal, the job market's brutal, nobody's arguing that part. But if you actually talk to these guys, a weird pattern shows up. A lot of them aren't stuck because the world locked them out. They're stuck because some part of them never agreed to leave. There's a name for this in psychology, and it's not lazy. It's not unmotivated. Carl Jung had a term for it decades ago, and it explains why some men can be sharp, talented, full of ideas, and still can't make themselves send the email, finish the application, or commit to the relationship. Today, we're getting into exactly what's happening underneath that pattern. And fair warning, if this is you, it's going to sting a little before it helps. So let's talk about what's actually going on, because lazy doesn't explain a guy who can talk for 20 minutes about 3 different business ideas but can't bring himself to update his resume. Jung had a term for this, Puer Aeternus, Latin for the eternal boy. And here's the thing, it's not about intelligence. Some of the sharpest guys you know fit this perfectly. What defines it is one obsession: total, unrestricted freedom. Not freedom to do something, freedom from commitment, from being tied down, from ever having to pick a lane and live with it. Jung's protege, a researcher named Marie-Louise von France, used a term for this state that'll probably hit a little too close to home: the provisional life. You know the feeling. This job is just temporary until the real thing comes along. This apartment is just temporary. Even this relationship, temporary, because the right one is still out there somewhere. Everything's a placeholder. Nothing's real yet. That's the internal feeling. But there's also a name for the actual life stage this happens in. And it's not the same thing. It's the container the feeling lives inside. Psychologists actually built a whole separate framework around this exact stretch of life. They call it emerging adulthood. Late teens into the late 20s, this weird in-between zone where you're not a teenager anymore, but you haven't actually locked into adult life either. It used to barely exist as a life stage. Now it's where a huge chunk of guys just live, permanently in between. Here's what's wild, though. This isn't really about freedom at all. It's a shield. And to understand why a grown man would build his entire life around staying 22 forever, we got to go back further than you'd think, all the way back to who he was as a kid. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. Von Franz noticed something specific about the men who end up trapped like this. Most of them were the gifted kid, the one who read early, picked things up fast, got called so smart by every teacher and relative within earshot. And that label feels amazing at 7 years old. The problem is what it quietly builds. Your whole identity gets wired around being special, around having potential instead of around what you actually finish. Then adulthood shows up, and adulthood does not care about potential. Adulthood only pays out on results. You take a real job, and you're mediocre at first. You get rejected. You meet people who are just better than you, and it's not close. For a kid who built his whole self-image on being the smart one, that's not just disappointing. It feels like a threat to who he is. And there's a second piece to this that barely gets mentioned. Von Franz traced part of this back to what Jungian psychology calls the mother complex, essentially how much a guy's mother did for him growing up, smoothing the way so he never had to. And separately, more recent researchers have linked a chunk of this to something they now call helicopter parenting. Parents hovering so close, removing every obstacle that the kid never gets the rep of falling down and getting back up on his own. He never builds the muscle. So later, some part of him is still looking for somebody to hand him the safety net he never had to build for himself. Put those two things together, the golden child label and the missing wrap of struggle, and you get a guy whose brain has one move when reality gets hard: stall. And stalling doesn't feel like fear from the inside. It feels like a strategy. We'll get into exactly how twisted that logic is in a second, but first, let's look at how many guys this is actually happening to right now. because the number is bigger than you'd guess. So that stall-out mechanism we just talked about, it's not some rare thing happening to a handful of guys. It's showing up in the actual data, and the data is honestly kind of stunning. Pew Research pulled the numbers, and as of last year, 18% of American adults between 25 and 34 are living in a parent's house, not college kids, grown men in their late 20s and early 30s. And here's the part that should make you sit up. It's split by gender. 20% of young men, 15% of young women. Men are landing back home at a noticeably higher rate, and some economists argue it's not just rent prices forcing this, that a chunk of it tracks with avoidance, not affordability, even though that's still a debated point. But step back and look at the bigger picture. Outside of one brief blip back in the early 2010s, this is the highest rate of young adults living with parents since the 1940s. The 1940s! Before the internet, before remote work, before any of the modern excuses. Something deeper is going on here than just housing costs. Picture the guy living this. 29 years old. Same bedroom he had at 15. Maybe the same posters still on the wall. He's not unintelligent. He's not incapable. He's just frozen in a room that time forgot to update. And the scary part is, from the inside, frozen doesn't feel like frozen. It feels like he's just figuring things out. Which brings us to the actual mechanism behind that feeling, the one thing that keeps a smart, capable guy stuck in place, without him even realizing he's doing it to himself. All right, here's where it gets genuinely fascinating, because this next part isn't theory. It's been tested in actual labs. Psychologists have a name for what's happening: self-handicapping, a concept first identified by researchers Edward Jones and Stephen Berglas back in the late 1970s. And the research that followed is wild. Psychologists Diane Tice and Roy Baumeister studied this directly and found that people will deliberately sabotage their own preparation before a test, easing off practice right when it matters most, specifically to protect their ego if they fail. Not because they wanted to fail, because failing with an excuse stings way less than failing with none. And more recent research backs this up hard. Multiple studies on procrastination have found that people with shaky self-esteem are significantly more likely to self-handicap than people who feel secure in their ability. Translation: the guy who delays everything isn't doing it because he doesn't care. He's doing it because some part of him cares so much he can't risk finding out he's not as good as the potential label he's been carrying since he was 9. Think about what that actually means. As long as he never really tries, never sends the application with everything he's got, never trains like it actually matters, he gets to keep the fantasy alive. Because the second he goes all in and it doesn't work out, he can't tell himself, "I just wasn't trying yet," anymore. The excuse runs out. So instead, he keeps the excuse on life support, forever if he has to. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, though. This isn't a one-time decision. It's not like he sits down and decides, "I'm going to self-handicap." It's automatic, quiet. It's running in the background every single day, disguised as something else entirely. Comfort, escapism, just relaxing. And it usually shows up in 3 very specific patterns. Let's get into the first one. Trap 1. The escape hatch. Every time real pressure shows up, a deadline, a hard conversation, or that creeping feeling of "I should be further along by now," the move isn't to deal with it. It's to disappear into something that turns the volume down. Hours of gaming, endless scrolling, whatever flavor of dopamine is closest. And look, everybody unwinds. That's not the issue. The issue is using it as a replacement for living instead of a break from it. Inside the game, the guy's a hero. He closes the laptop, and he's the same guy in the same room with the same unanswered emails. Trap 2. Running from anything permanent. This one's sneakier than people think because it usually starts strong. New relationship, new job, he's all in, genuinely excited. But the second it asks for something real, a 5-year plan, shared finances, and actual commitment, something in him quietly starts pulling back. And there's a deeper layer here psychologists point to. A lot of these guys gravitate toward partners who'll absorb the responsibility for them, the bills, the planning, the emotional heavy lifting, which lets him stay in the role of the one being managed instead of the one managing. It's not random. It's the path of least resistance every time. Trap 3. It's everyone else's fault. The economy, the job market, the boss who doesn't get it. And listen, some of that frustration is completely fair. Things genuinely are harder right now. But the trap springs when that becomes the entire explanation. Because the second everything bad is someone else's doing, there's nothing left for him to actually fix. He's not stuck, he's just waiting for things to get fair. And here's the thing about naming all three of these out loud. It's not about feeling worse. It's about finally seeing the enemy clearly enough to actually do something about it. So here's the belief sitting underneath every single one of those traps. And it's a quiet one. The idea that responsibility kills who you are. That the second you commit to a job, a person, or a routine, that's it, game over. You're just another guy with a mortgage and no dreams left. That adulthood is basically a cage with a paycheck. It's the exact opposite. Responsibility isn't what kills your potential. It's the only thing that's ever turned potential into something real. Think about it like this. Talent without structure just evaporates. A guy with real writing talent who never builds the discipline to actually sit down and write? That talent dies in his head, untouched. A guy with a genuinely good business idea who's too scared of risk to ever learn the boring stuff, budgets, taxes, actually managing money. That idea stays exactly where it's always been, a note on his phone. Commitment isn't the thing standing between you and your potential. It's the only bridge that gets you there. Every guy you've ever looked at and thought, man, he's got it together. He didn't get there by staying open to everything. He got there by closing some doors on purpose so he could actually walk all the way through the one that mattered. And once that clicks, the real question isn't, how do I stay free? It's, what do I actually do starting today to stop being the guy standing outside his own life? That's exactly where we're headed next. Okay, so if any part of the last few minutes hit a little too close, here's the good news. This isn't a personality, it's a pattern. And patterns can be broken. Not with motivation, not with some big emotional moment where everything suddenly clicks, with 3 specific moves. Move 1. Stack small, boring proof. Your brain doesn't believe you're capable because you've told it you are. It believes it because you've shown it, over and over in tiny, unglamorous ways. So start absurdly small. Make your bed every morning. Answer that one email you've been avoiding. Cook one actual meal instead of ordering out. None of that's impressive on its own, but every time you follow through on something small, you're literally building the evidence file your brain needs to believe you'll follow through on something big. Skip this step and chase the huge goal first, and you'll just self-handicap your way out of it like always. Move 2. Pick one thing you've been avoiding specifically because you might be bad at it, and do it anyway, badly if you have to. Send the resume to 5 companies, even though you might get rejected by all 5. Take the class where you'll definitely be the worst person in the room at first. The fear running this whole show is the fear of finding out you're not special. So you've got to go find that out on purpose in low-stakes situations until it stops being terrifying. Rejection survived a few times stops being a monster. It just becomes Tuesday. Move 3, and this is the one guys skip because it stings the ego a little. Get someone in your corner who won't let you slide. Not someone who validates every excuse you make. Someone who actually calls it when you're stalling. A mentor, a coach, a genuinely disciplined friend, even a structured program. Willpower alone loses to a tired Tuesday night 9 times out of 10. An outside voice that expects something from you wins way more often than your own internal negotiation ever will. None of these 3 moves are dramatic. That's actually the whole point. The guy who gets unstuck isn't the one waiting for some lightning bolt transformation. He's the one who just quietly started doing the unimpressive stuff, on repeat, longer than felt comfortable. So back to where we started, that number. 1 in 5 young American men right now, back in the room they grew up in. And the uncomfortable truth is, for a good chunk of them, it's not the economy keeping them there. It's a part of them that never agreed to leave childhood in the first place. The good news? That part of you isn't your identity. It's just a pattern you picked up, which means it's a pattern you can put down. Adulthood was never the cage. It was always the only door that led somewhere. If this one hit a nerve, hit like and subscribe so we can keep digging into the stuff that actually explains why we get stuck. And if there's a guy in your life who needs to hear this, send it his way, not as a call-out, as a hand reaching back for him.